Hello, everybody. This is Charismatic Cheetah. My name is Michael Young. On today's episode, it's going to be a little different. I'm going to have a guest on the YouTube portion of the channel interviewing me about addiction recovery in the church. I'm going to tell a little bit of my own story. I'm going to talk about how church members can better react to alcoholics and drug addicts trying to get recovery in their churches or homes or whatever. And also talk about what addicts and alcoholics or potential addicts and alcoholics can do to get help. So today it's going to be a little different. I have a guest coming on to interview me. Bold Apologia Podcast has been gracious enough to come on the show. So it'll be going up on my YouTube channel, obviously. And it'll also be going up on his Spotify, Bold Apologia Podcast. So it'll be on both platforms. And so hope you enjoy. Thanks. Oh, please subscribe, please like, please comment, please share this video. It really helps out the channel more than anything, more than you would know. Helps the algorithm put my videos in front of more people. So if you're a fan of this channel, you really like it, you've been blessed by it, please like, share, comment, all that good stuff. Thank you.
Well, hey there, Bold Apologia Podcast listeners and Charismatic Cheetah listeners. I am here with Michael Young. My name's Adam Parker. We are doing a collaboration project, or better to say, podcast. And the theme for this podcast is actually on addiction. Michael Young, he actually has a great testimony related to his journey through addiction. He's a case manager at a treatment center for addiction recovery. Yeah. And so I'm really excited about what God is going to do in and through this podcast. You know, people will be wondering, okay, Adam, aren't you like an apologetics podcast? And yes, this podcast is an apologetics podcast, but something that needs to be understood is one of the things that, and actually Dr. Donald Williams said this in a podcast a while back. He said that one of the goals in apologetics is to remove roadblocks that are keeping people from faith. And if people are putting their trust in their addiction or the things that are keeping them bound up, that roadblock's going to be there. And so, yeah, apologetics, but this is different. This channel is different than what you would see in a lot of these other, kind of apologetic conversations, because I think it's so much more than giving, the best argument. And so that's why I'm really excited about having Michael on the podcast, Charismatic Cheetah, and collaborating on this. So yeah, we're going to be exploring addiction and recovery in this podcast. And with that said, I really want to get into Michael's journey because, quite frankly, you're more of the expert on this, and you've got a great testimony to go along with it. And so I guess what I'd like to jump into for the first segment of this is your personal journey. And I'm wondering, can you share with us, which I know you can, share with us your story and what was your journey with addiction like?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And also,
Absolutely.
at the same time, thanks for coming on to my channel.
Yeah.
So it's kind of anyway.
No, it's absolutely right.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, man. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, my name's Michael.
Real quick before we jump into that, do you want to share also what your channel's about as well?
Yeah. So yeah, Charismatic Cheetah. That's my my main thing is my Facebook page. It started off as a meme page, just kind of as a joke. And over the last few months, I've actually kind of switched over to like trying to do some YouTube stuff. I got my own podcast on Spotify. Just trying to do some stuff. Trying to branch out more than just memes. Trying to do videos about obviously, but the spiritual gifts. Thinking biblically about those. But also like thinking about biblically about other things as well. Trying to just trying to get out there and do more than just memes. I love memes. I think they're great, but trying to glorify God and teaching, and this is the ultimate platform to get in front of people. So here we are.
Yeah. Amen to that. And so your story, What was your story? What's your story? What was your journey or battle with addiction like? Things like that.
Yeah, man. So I'm 35 now. Just got my 5 years clean and sober on May the 9th.
Great.
Me and my wife both. But really my story really starts in high school. It was in the, I guess mid 2000s, early 2000s, basically, when I was in high school. It was the peak of the pill epidemic. So they were handing
Mm.
out pain pills, opioid pain pills, and things like Xanax and stuff like that, like candy. And of course, I never really had a prescription for them, but I was able to get them really easy. I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't, I don't know. I started using drugs, started experimenting, obviously with like weed and stuff like that. But things really got bad really quickly too. When I was probably 16 or 17, I got my hands on some pain pills, and those. I mean, as soon as I took those, I knew I was hooked. I was just, I was done. And of course, drugs like Xanax, stuff like that. Of course, pretty much all the hard drugs, except for I didn't do heroin or crack back then. Wasn't shooting up or anything like that. The main thing was really pills, though.
Mm-hmm.
In high school, got really bad off. By the time I graduated high school, somehow, I actually had a couple of teachers that were really, really merciful to me. They didn't want to see me next year too, so they like kind of helped me pass on with like a 70.
Gotcha.
And praise God. So I got my diploma. That was 2007. And I basically didn't make it 9 months out of high school when I finally broke down and told my dad I needed to go to rehab. Things had just gotten that bad to where my whole life was just getting high and running out of money, trying to get money, and then working, and then trying to get high some more, basically.
Right.
So I went to rehab. This was 2008, like I said, March of 2008, something like that. And that was the first time I got introduced to like the 12 steps, which is all about God. If you ever want to look into those, it's obviously something that I push because it helped me a lot. And I'll get into that here in a second. But
Great.
I kind of got introduced to like the basics of recovery, got a little bit of therapy. I was only there for like 28 days. I got out of there and I went to what's called sober living, which is kind of like, it's kind of like a halfway house, but it's just like a regular house, usually 2 or 3 or 4 or more guys to a room. You get drug tested, accountability to make sure you're going to like meetings or going to church, and teach you basic life skills. And that's basically what I was part of that house for a little while. And that's really when I actually got introduced completely to the 12 steps. I went through, and due to anonymity, I'm going to keep it to this 12 step. I'm not going to go into exactly which fellowship. Right. But I got introduced to the 12 steps, and that's really my first ever genuine introduction to God. It's just general God, God as you understand him kind of thing.
Right.
And a lot of people don't like that phrase because it's like, well, Jesus is not God of understanding. Jesus is God, but it's a great place for someone like me with no church background. Cause I thought I would have walked into a church at 19 years old, and they would have started, trying to tell me about Jesus. I would have been shut off to it. Like, what do you know about addiction? What are you going to tell me,
Mm-hmm.
But when I went into 12-step meetings and started working the steps, and obviously a big part of that is God, then that was really kind of my introduction. So I had this really powerful experience with the 12 steps, just kind of like God in general, you know what I mean? But it was powerful. I mean, somewhere between step 1 and 12 within a few weeks, my whole life turned around. I was just 19-year-old little punk, basically, didn't care about anybody but myself. And then within a few weeks of actually praying and trying to help other people, what we call cleaning house, like getting rid of resentments and selfishness, stuff like that,
Right.
And man, I had this powerful experience. It wasn't like a burning bush or something that happened all at once, but I remember it was very powerful. I changed. I mean, everything that like I was sleeping around still, that just stopped. I don't know, just stopped doing it. I quit listening to rap music. I quit listening to like anything that would remind me of like drugs. And it wasn't because like I was tempted to get high because I was listening to that music, but
you had an appetite change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Exactly. And so like I went from darkness into light, and
right.
I would have called myself a Christian but more of a cultural Christian. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know the word Trinity. I didn't know any of that stuff.
Right.
But luckily, I had a couple mentors in my life. One of them was the house manager at this sober living house. His name was Andrew. He had like 6 or 7 months or something like that, but he had a lot of experience and knowledge around the Bible and Jesus. And during that transformation, first he went from being kind of an enemy of mine because he was always trying to hold me accountable and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But somehow, like, when all that happened, we became like best friends. I started like riding with him. We go to meetings together, just hang out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always talking about Jesus and listening to Christian music, Hillsong United specifically. I don't want to promote them, but I will say that God can use anything,
Yeah, he can.
But I do remember listening to some of those songs, and just being like, wow, this is cool. So to kind of skip forward a little bit. So what actually brought me to Jesus, that actual moment, is we were coming home, me and him were coming home, I believe from a meeting or something. And I'm riding in his car, and I go, you know what? Like, Andrew, I know who God is. Like, I've had this experience with God. I pray in the morning, I pray at night. I try to help other people, yada, yada. I was like, but I hear you talk about Jesus a lot, and he was different than other people too because of that. Like, the people I knew who were Christians, like genuine Christians, they were different than even the people in the 12-step meetings that were just kind of God, doing the God thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually, I was like, I know who God is and all that stuff, but I hear you talking about Jesus all the time. Who is Jesus? Like, how do I get to know Jesus? And I think he said something smarter than what he could have ever said. It's definitely a God, because he got quiet instead of just being like, well, go say this prayer when you get home, or go blah, 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 read this or read that. He said, tonight when you go home and do your prayers, before you go to bed, ask God to show you who his son is. That simple. That's it. And I said, okay, cool. And I did. And I mean, nothing happened that night, but God started to show me who his son was.
That's awesome.
The real moment that really blew my mind was, like, I didn't know where to start in the Bible. I wanted to read the Bible. I didn't know where to start. And I was asking people like, where do I start? And I kept saying Genesis. I tried to read Genesis. Like, this doesn't make any sense. What is this? Someone said Matthew. So I got me a Bible. Actually, he bought me a Bible. Andrew did. A really nice one. And I cracked open Matthew, and I got to chapter 5, 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount. And the words of Jesus blew my freaking mind. I was like, wow, what is this? You know what I mean? And so I'm in my room at my sober living house reading this stuff. I get up, I take my Bible around the house, and I'm like, check this out, y'all. Like, check out what Jesus is saying. You know what I mean? It just like, it was, I don't know. It was like drinking water for the first time. I don't know, And
it's a very, very good analogy. Very scriptural one.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Living water. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was quite the experience. Right. So, now I wish that was obviously 2008. Obviously I just got 5 years clean and sober recently, which is a huge landmark for me, personally, because so essentially, long story short, I stayed sober and clean for 4.5 years, throughout that period. I ended up moving out to Florida after about 2 years, and got part of I was real big in the house church, organic house church movement. It was real big back then. A lot of people don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about that, but it was the organic house church movement that
kind
was
of made popular by Francis Chan a little bit there.
A little bit. It was actually before he went that route, actually.
Okay. Oh, so you were in it before it came mainstream. All right.
Exactly. Yeah, really.
Or Francis Chan made it mainstream. Okay.
Exactly.
Cool,
I was a hipster, man. Christian hipster.
That's right.
But anyway, I moved out there. The main thing I quit doing that I think now set me up for failure was the main thing that helps me even today isn't like the praying is obviously good. All that stuff is good. I'm not saying all that stuff's bad. But the 12th step talks about carrying the message of recovery to the next suffering.
Could you say that one more time? Your mic.
Is it staticky?
It's good now. It's good.
Okay, cool. So the 12th step talks about like carry this message to the alcoholic or drug addict who still suffers. That's the main thing. Like
Yeah.
show how you got clean or sober to the next person. And what that does for someone who's already sober, right, is like it reminds you, oh, I'm only one bad day away from being the guy I'm sitting across from, you know. I quit doing that. I was still pretty heavily involved in the church, but I quit doing that piece. The rest of it I was doing, you know.
Right.
But long story short, the last year or so I was sober. So 2012, I had started this, me and some friends and also a couple of mentors of mine, started this business where we were like basically maintaining foreclosed properties out in Florida. And I was working 80, 90, 120 hours a week, easy. But I wasn't making much money. It was just like paying my bills because we were trying to build this business up.
Yeah.
Well, obviously I isolated. I was no longer plugged into a community of believers. I was working too much. I had a lot of resentments. It all built up, and I actually ended up relapsing of all things on communion wine. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Which is weird. It sounds weird to people because it's only like a sip of alcohol. What does a sip got to do with anything? But it was the way my mind was working up before that moment that I thought it would be okay to drink. And I was actually like I relapsed up here before I actually relapsed physically.
Okay.
But the way we did communion at the house churches I was part of was instead of doing the little cups and the little, wafers and a little thing of grape juice, we would sit down. It's only like 30 or 40 of us. So we'd sit down for a meal and we would take like one loaf of bread. You break a piece off as the body, and then they would pass a cup around, just one cup with wine, and you take a sip of that and pass it on. Well, for people like me and for kids, they had grape juice. Obviously, like we always had grape juice available. And for years I'd passed the communion cup, no problem, you know?
Right.
But the day I actually took a sip of it, it was coming around to me and I was like, you know what? I was 22, I think at the time, something like that. I'd been sober for a few years, and my 21st birthday, I was sober. I didn't drink or, none of that stuff.
Right.
And so, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, I don't want to be a kid anymore. I want to be able to drink like an adult. And because of Christ, like I'm healed of addiction. I'm no longer an addict. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I should be able to take a sip of communion wine, no problem. Well, it came around. I took a sip, I passed it on, and nothing happened. Nothing. The sky didn't fall. I didn't jump up and go to the liquor store and buy a bottle of Jack Daniels. None of that stuff happened. I didn't go find some pills to go take. Nothing happened. And I remember thinking, they lied to me in AA. Like they lied to me. And so that was just more of a kind of a slip. But a couple months later, actually, New Year's Eve, 2012, going to 2013. Is when I actually went out and like relapsed completely.
Okay.
I went out and drank, and drinking turned into, within a few weeks, I was drinking every day. Within a few months, I was taking pills again. I was doing heroin for the first time. I was smoking crack for the first time. It quickly spiraled out of control. Within a few months of that, 4.5 years, you would think it would take a while to get to where as bad as I was when I was in high school.
Yeah.
But it only took a few short months before I was out of control completely again, and doing things I had never done before. Like I said, I'd never done heroin before. I was doing that. Wow. I was using needles instead of just taking pills. It just quickly spiraled out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, man, the next 6 years of my story is basically I was in and out of treatment centers. I was in and out of like psychiatric hospitals, like suicide attempts, stuff like that, jail. I was in and out of church. I was in and out of 12-step meetings. One of the things that really helped me a lot, that kind of saved my life, was I met my wife in 2016 and we got married in 2017. She's also one of us. Like me and her share the same sobriety date right now. And so I don't know, something about when I met her, I slowed down a lot. So I wasn't like drinking and using every day, like for the last few years before I got sober again. But I was very much, I couldn't get like 3 or 6 months and I'd relapse and I'd go slip up again or whatever. But essentially, and then in May 9th of 2019, I lost yet another really good job I had. About 9 months clean at the time. I relapsed on some methamphetamine. I was working out in the oil field, and of course I brought it back home. Me and my wife started using together because, again, she's like I am, and also obviously there was some codependency there back then as well.
Yeah.
And anyway, for the next 8 months, me and her we lose everything. We lose our cars. We almost lost the house. We were on the verge of divorce. And I remember specifically one day I was like, I need to go back to a meeting. I need to get back sober again, because I knew what 4.5 years of being sober was like. And I knew that, like, this isn't all there is. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
And obviously I was a believer. And so, I was kind of, honestly, I was kind of on the fence about the Jesus thing for a while there. But I was still a believer, deep down.
Yeah. Right.
And so anyway, we started going to meetings, and I got me what's called a sponsor, someone that takes you through the 12 steps, someone with more time than you. And again, I had a spiritual awakening, as the 12 steps talk about. And yeah, man. And then about 2 years into that, I actually got back into a church, the church I'm at now, Pursuit Bible Church in Cleburne, and essentially got rebaptized because I finally dedicated my life to Jesus again.
Yeah.
And so here we are. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a great story. And you've been sober for 5 years now, you've been saying. And so, gosh, that's quite the testimony. And addiction and struggles with addiction, like what you've experienced, there's quite a few people in America and in the world, really, who go through what you're going and what you have gone through. And so for those wondering, why do a podcast on something like this? Well, there's people out there who need to hear stories like this. On top of that, the church can always do better. The church can always do better at helping people get free from addiction, get that deliverance from addiction. And, I just want to say, just as we continue, just for those listening, we're going to have several more segments going from this point forward. We're going to do a segment next on understanding addiction. Then we're going to take a look at some biblical perspectives, a biblical perspective in overdose awareness. That's segment 3. Segment 4 is the role of community and faith. So what can the church do? And then segment 5 is some practical advice, and we're going to take a look at some resources. And so thank you for that testimony. I really appreciate you sharing that. That is powerful. So one thing that I would like to ask you now, then, right off the bat, is, from your experience, how would you define addiction?
How would I define addiction? Okay, so I thought about this one because it's a tough question. It's a very well studied question as well. Obviously, I'm no therapist. I'm no neurologist, addictionologist, anything like that. But the best way I could describe it, and I kind of wrote it down here. So it's the inability to regulate a substance or behavior. So behavior being like gambling or shopping, something like that, or pornography. Once started. So basically, once the behavior or the drug is put into the body, something happens that's different than normal people. To where, okay, let me put it this way. So, if are you in recovery for alcohol?
Me? No.
Yeah.
No. I am not. I'm not actually. I'm not in recovery for anything. Not that I haven't had any kind of it. I do know people who have had addiction ministries.
Yeah.
And so that's about as far as my experience with that goes.
Cool.
And so you're talking to, someone who's familiar, but even still, much of a novice compared to, compared to you at least. And and I mean that in the most honorable way possible. Of course.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, and so I've been around people who have struggled through addiction. I had a family member who led a prison ministry. And so for 3.5 years of my life, and actually the first 3.5 years of my time being in ministry, I spent a lot of time around people
Mm.
who were struggling through addiction, trying to stay clean, things like that. So with that said, yeah, that's about as much of my experience. But anyway, back to what you were saying. I
Cool.
hope that question helps. But
Absolutely. Yeah. It
yeah,
actually makes it easier. So let's say, I don't know, and I'm not going to put any moral, let's just say that if you decided you wanted to go have 2 beers after mowing the lawn today. Um, when you drank those 2 beers specifically, what would happen after the second one for you?
for me, man, I don't know if I'd make it through the first one. I'm not much of an alcohol guy,
Perfect.
but yeah, it would start to impact or impair my ability to
Yeah, but you wouldn't
interact with
have
the world around me.
the third one though. You said you would
No.
barely get through the first one, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're what we call a normie, someone who, like, you intend to have 2 beers, maybe you have one, maybe you have half of one, nothing happens after that. Okay.
Right.
So for someone who is an addict or an alcoholic, for example, they intend to have those 2 beers, like, genuinely, like, I'm going to have 2 beers today. I'm going to moderate my drinking. And I've tried this before myself, obviously. Instead of having those 2 beers, I get to the second one. Something happens in my body that's different than your body, at least in this particular theory, that when I have those two, there's something in me that says more. I have the third one,
Mm.
and that makes it even worse. It compounds on itself. So it's like, oh, I just had 3. I need more, 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 more. So
You sound like
there's
me and, Skittles out of the bag.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, it's gonna have a couple, and I end up having way too many. So
The whole
uh,
bag.
that's part of, yeah, that's part of. So that's kind of the first part, and it's kind of a two-part thing. So once I put it in my body, something happens differently than
Mm,
normal people, right? And you can do that with
right.
food. You can do that with like sex. If you're married, obviously, if you're not married, you shouldn't have any sex at all. But there are sex addicts within marriages and stuff like that. So you can
Yeah.
put a lot of things in there, or shopping. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
you intend to go, oh, I'm going to buy my spouse something off of Amazon that they need. And
Yeah.
next thing I know, I've spent $1,000 and I got all these packages coming. I can't regulate it once I start it. So it's a two-edged sword, right? So there's that side of it.
Yeah.
And the side that's kind of simple, right? It's like, okay,
Mhm.
well, to solve that problem, just don't do the first one. You know what I mean? If
You
don't
would
drink
think.
the first beer. Yeah, don't take the first pill. Don't buy like, have your spouse order their own stuff on Amazon, whatever. It's a pretty simple solution.
Yeah.
But the part that's the cunning, baffling, and the powerful part is that once I make that decision to stop, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm not going to use anymore, whatever it is. I'm not going to eat. Not going to eat like addictively, right?
Right.
Once I make that decision to stop, there's something that happens between that last one and then the next relapse. So my brain will tell me, like, with my own personal experience, right? 4.5 years sober. And long before I ever took that first drink of the communion wine or drank on New Year's Eve, like, completely, in my mind, I started thinking, well, in high school, I was more of a pillhead than I was an alcoholic. I've got a few years now. I'm over 21. I've been healed in Christ. These things, my mind started talking to me, started saying, well, you could probably drink and it would be all right.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's basically the second part is really has to deal with, like, the mind, the inability to stay stopped.
Right.
I can't stay stopped on my own willpower. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but
Yeah.
uh, basically, body and mind and body,
Right.
so it's
Your
a
mind and your
double-edged
body
sword.
are both craving this substance, and it's to a point where you don't really have much control over that. And by substance, it doesn't have to necessarily be a physical substance. It could
Right.
be something like pornography, like what you mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, that the visuals you get from that cause a chemical reaction in the brain that make you desire more later on. I don't know how it happens. I'm not a scientist in any way, but actually, I took a group of boys through because I serve as a youth pastor as well. Took a group of boys through something called the Conquer series, and in that series, what's his name? Well, anyway, the guy who leads that series, he goes through how you take a look at a porn addict's brain and you take a look at an
Yeah.
addict's brain.
Yep.
They're relative. The chemical reactions taking place in those brains are
Yep.
relatively similar, very similar actually.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, visuals can cause just as much of an addiction. You could
Yep.
probably see a similar thing with people who have video game addiction, which is actually a real problem. There is
Yeah.
such a thing as a video game addiction. So,
Absolutely.
and it really, what you said really ties into this question I have. Can you explain what addiction does to the body and mind on a physiological level? You kind of already
Yeah.
explained that, but what do you got to say as far as the body goes? How does it impact your body?
Oh man.
If you're struggling through addiction and you're really, suffering through that, like even thinking about what it's like for people coming off of drugs and
Yeah.
how that impacts their bodies. But anyway, I just want to give you the platform to talk a little bit more about that even.
Yeah. Man, there's a lot. So on the brain part, right? So you're talking about, again, I'm no neurologist or anything like that, but the synapses, so where, communication is passed from one brain cell to the next, there's dopamine, serotonin, endorphin, stuff like that within those chemical reactions. And essentially drugs are flooding the brain with dopamine, serotonin, etc. But the thing that happens in there is like you start to burn up, literally you're burning brain cells up.
Mhm.
Your brain gets to a point where it can no longer regulate dopamine production on its own. So I've got 5 years clean, right?
Right.
But there's still things like I have to keep notes. Like right now, I have to keep notes next to me because I will get off in the left field. It's more than just like ADD or something like that, but I get off in the left field and forget what I'm doing. You're essentially burning literally you're burning your brain up with drugs, and it takes a long time to heal. But what's cool is like God has put this in our bodies to where we heal a lot. Like, mostly we heal, but there's still damage there. I would say, a lot of my, like I have a pretty, it's a lot better than it used to be. But I'm a pretty high anxiety type of person. And I can tell you that I was not this high anxiety 10 years ago. I was
Right.
not this high anxiety in high school, even
Yeah.
with like teenage angst and all that stuff. Um, but I've done something because of the alcohol and because of the drugs like Xanax are designed for people with anxiety to
Mhm.
basically calm your brain. And I've abused those so much that I think my brain actually has an issue like regulating anxiety. You know what I mean? So now I
Yeah.
have to like really, like, I did announcements today at church and I'm sitting there. I know it's after worship and I'm like, okay, I know what the last song is. And it's just building, building, building. It's just all this anxiety. And
Right.
honestly, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that has gotten worse over the years with the amount of times I've relapsed and everything else. So that's the brain part. The brain is, and yeah, things like pornography. I tell people that I work with at the treatment center that I work at, and also doing stuff that I volunteer work, to help other people as much as I
Right.
can. And by the way, I'm not a good person for that. I'm just doing that to keep myself sober because I need that to remind me of what it's like and help other people. Anyway, so
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but I tell people all the time, I was like, because I did the same thing. The first time I ever got clean in '08, I actually substituted, like I got off the drugs and I got really bad in the pornography, really bad. I mean, it was worse. Like I'd never experienced anything like that before in my life.
Hmm.
And it was really bad. And it's because like my brain, your brain doesn't know the difference between a hit of cocaine and a hit of pornography. It just doesn't know the difference. It just
Right.
knows dopamine. Yay. It feels good. We want more of this. Give me more,
Right.
So yeah, so that's the brain part, right?
Yeah.
Now the body part, obviously, a good example of this is I actually contracted hepatitis C from sharing needles with people.
Mhm.
Luckily, I've had that cured because of some modern drugs they have out that are really expensive. But so I've had that cured, but still, I've done damage to my liver. There's a lot. I mean, any
Yeah.
organ you can think of, you're damaging by putting chemicals inside of it, and you're also burning up your brain literally
Right.
from doing drugs and alcohol, and that impacts for quite a long time. Even after someone gets clean or sober, I would say for the first 6 months of my sobriety, I still had like some paranoia. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it wasn't as intense as it was while in active addiction, but there was still some paranoia and some, like, every now and then I'd be like,
Yeah.
I'm really nervous for no reason. I feel like somebody's watching me. I know it's not true, and it would pass, but still, it's 6 months before I got over that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it impacts anything you can think of. Every part of your body, and your brain is just destroyed by drugs and alcohol. It's horrible.
Yeah. And while you were just talking, I was able to kind of look up, actually, for those of you who are like, what is the Conquer series and all of that. His name's Ted Roberts. And just to reiterate what you said, the body will crave what it is that you have been addicted to. So
Yeah.
you've got your brain fighting against you. You have your body fighting against you. This really is the flesh, right? This is the
Yeah.
flesh at war
Yeah.
with the spirit in so many ways. And yeah, thank you for that description. And that brings me to this question: being someone who has fought through addiction, and it makes me think you probably have some good insights as to how addiction will really affect someone's spiritual life. And in some way or another, we all have faced some kind of thing to do with the flesh that is pulling on us, trying
Yeah.
to pull us away from what it is God would have us do in the way we live. And so, do you have any unique insights when it comes to just the fact of how addiction will affect us spiritually?
I mean, there's obviously when we're feeding the flesh, that obviously, because we're holistic beings, right? We're not just, you can't separate our soul or spirit, whatever, from our body and mind. We're holistic beings. We are,
Yeah,
not like all of me is Michael, you know what I mean? Not just part of me or whatever.
right.
Otherwise we'd be, Gnostics or something like that. But
Yeah,
so obviously when I'm feeding the flesh, I'm going to be starving my spirit essentially. But the part that's really scary is that you open yourself up to very intense demonic activity. You know what I mean? I mean, really, it's definitely, I would consider drug addiction a lot like alchemy, like what they used to call alchemy,
yeah.
witchcraft. I mean, Paul calls it
Pharmakia.
pharmakia,
Yeah.
witchcraft essentially, right? Like, 'cause
Could
that's
I
what it
just
is.
interject real quick? I knew someone, I won't say his name, but he referred to himself as a prophet, and there is a very spiritual nature to the use of drugs, and in not a good way. I agree with you. It is demonic. I think
Yeah.
drugs and addiction in all its forms is demonic. I really do believe that. But this individual, he referred to himself as a prophet, and what he would do to be effective as a prophet, quote unquote. And I just want to say this is a guy who had some spot on prophecies. You're like,
Mm,
how did you know that about me? Well,
yeah.
one of the things that he would do is he would go on day long drug benders, what and it came out, he was kind of exposed for this, that by getting into drugs, by partaking in his addiction, he was able to, quote unquote, see into the spiritual realm, and he would
Wow.
be able to get insights. And I flat out told him, because this came out, I confronted him on it. And and I had to confront him on it because he would always try to prophesy over people in the youth group. Eventually, it got to the point where I myself, when I found this out, I was like, you need to stay away from our kids.
Yeah.
You need to stay away from
Absolutely.
them. I was already uncomfortable with this person trying to prophesy regardless, but this gave me some some good ammunition to say, get out of here. You have
Yeah.
no place, stay
Wow.
away from the children. And
Wow.
but yeah, essentially what he would do is he would use these drugs to try to tap into the spiritual realm. And that's what I guess what helped him have these prophecies that he would make, and they would be like, whoa, where did he learn that? And so this is like a false prophet using pharmakia, which
Yeah.
is really, this is he was practicing witchcraft.
Yep.
And yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Exactly.
this crazy nature, this demonic nature to drugs, and really any kind of addiction. Porn addiction is absolutely, it's demonic.
Yeah.
Addiction to pornography, things like that. But anyway, I totally stole that from you, but
No, you're
I'll
good.
please
Wow.
take it back over. Take it back over. But and I know that's kind of a crazy story, right? um but but you know, I'm glad that he was exposed for that,
Yeah.
because as a
Wow.
pastor, you've got this guy coming and wanting to prophesy over your kids, and one, you want it to be authentic and real, and immediately I knew this is not real, and
Yeah.
looked into it, and this happens to come out at just the right moment for me to be able to have this confrontation with this person and tell them, Now's the time for you to stay away from these kids, or you and I are going to have," I told him, "You and I are going to have some problems if you
Yeah.
come around these kids anymore," because it,
Good.
it was just demonic. It was demonic. And I'm glad that, through discernment, I was able to see through that, and all glory to God for that as well. But anyway,
Amen.
you go ahead and take over on that question. Sorry
Uh,
about that.
no, you're good. And it's not just so obviously addiction in itself, like is witchcraft, pharmakia, that kind of thing, but also the things that you do while under the influence, or the things you do while trying to acquire money to acquire or whatever you're trying to do, right? So,
Mhm.
um, it's like it's all forms of sin. So,
Yeah.
porn and sexual immorality, they go hand in hand with alcoholism, drug addiction,
Yes.
right? But also like stealing, lying,
You get
all the
addicted to stealing.
yeah. I mean,
You get a rush.
I've known some people
Yeah.
who would have plenty of money and plenty of drugs and would still go shoplift just for the thrill of it.
Right.
I never understood that. I don't like jail. I hate jail. I'm like, I'm not risking jail unless I have to,
Right.
uh, but it's just like, I mean, everything you can think of, that is sinful, of the flesh, of the devil, is all involved in drug addiction and
Mhm.
alcoholism, and porn addiction, all that stuff. So it's all encompassing, and yeah, pretty much. It's
Yeah.
also, even if you know, for me it was always hard. It's hard to pray and connect with God if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I'm
Yeah.
sorry,
Right.
like a story I kind of have behind that is, shortly after I relapsed, when I was still in Florida, and I was trying to kind of manage it and control things. I wasn't in the hard drugs yet. I was drinking a lot and smoking weed, stuff like that. Well, I went to the church meeting we had. I was high on weed. I
Mm.
smoked some weed, and I was thinking, man, I can just, it's a plant. It's cool. I can just kind of sit in the back and listen there, because at the house church, everybody shared. It was kind of everyone brings something to share kind of thing. And so there was no like pastor or anything like that. It just all of
Yeah.
us kind of had equal say. And so I just sat in the back, and I remember trying to like connect with God high on weed, and it just wasn't there. It was just,
Right.
there was a blockage between me and him. And that's a big part of like the 12 steps, is to clear the blockage by, basically repenting. Essentially what the 12 steps do is they have you repent. Just, they don't say
Yeah.
those words. They don't want to scare you off, but it's basically repenting. It's quit doing what you're doing, start living by spiritual principles, start being honest, start helping others,
Yeah.
quit being a selfish jerk. And that helps kind of clear the blockage with God, and you can connect with him and use his power to get over the
Right.
addiction. So
What you said, weed, it's just a plant. you know, that is a common excuse that a lot of people will make in the addiction, you know, I don't know what you would want to call it. That the addiction journey that people are on, they come
yeah,
across this, and And I just want to throw out there as well, another quote unquote, substance made out of plants or shrooms,
Yeah.
or
Oh yeah.
ayahuasca. And man, have you ever listened to the Haunted Cosmos?
Yeah, a lot. Like
Oh
every
man, they
episode.
had this amazing episode on ayahuasca and drug use and its
Hmm.
relation to pharmakia. And this kind of ties back into what I was saying about that quote unquote prophet, or the guy who was really just doing a modern form of what the ancients would do, which is really witchcraft, using drugs to see into the spiritual realm.
Yep.
And the shot with shamanism, they would take drugs like these shrooms, and they would go into this different realm mentally, and they would see these spiritual beings. And gosh, I wish,
Yeah.
what I'm going to do is, for Bold Apologia.
Uh-oh.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, I lost you for a second.
The Bold Apologia Podcast. I'm going to leave a link in the description box directly to that podcast by Haunted Cosmos, because they do a much better job at covering that. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's such a deep spiritual conversation to have about that, and really just about the evils of using these drugs to enhance your life and
Yeah.
things like that. So with
Yeah.
that said, I think it's important to talk about the biblical perspectives on this.
Mm.
And with that, we'll talk about the biblical perspective on really the addiction, but also some overdose awareness stuff. So how do you perceive addiction spiritually or biblically, and how has this helped you? Right? Because we've
Mm.
had these conversations, we've talked about some really the negative spiritual side of it.
Yeah.
What do you got to share about it, and how can we fight this spiritual battle, those of us who
Um,
are addicted?
Obviously we've talked about how it's demonic. And I would think, of course I believe the Nephilim were the sons of God in Genesis 6 were, angelic beings. And I think Enoch has some truth in it. It's not scripture, but I would say that one of the things that Enoch says that these watchers taught humankind was basically pharmakia. They taught them how
Yeah,
to, cutting of roots and stuff
there
like
you
that.
go. Hmm.
So I think that, if that's true, and it could be argued either way, right? But if that's true, it makes sense to me from my own personal experience. But if that's true, that means that drug addiction, pharmakia, these things are not things that God gave us to enhance our lives.
Yeah.
There's some things that make, like, it's hard because, like, I can take a Tylenol and it helps me. I had a
Hmm.
headache.
Hmm.
Or I can take, for anxiety, magnesium citrate. It's a naturally occurring, chemical that I can take. It makes me feel better. So
Ashwagandha.
ashwagandha. Yeah. I mean, those
Yep.
are good things. But obviously there's obviously a very negative side to it. So you got to have discernment with it. But I think that for the most part, a lot of these, like mushrooms and all
Right.
that kind of
Well, you
thing.
would think that, if these are demonic beings that are trying to pull humanity away from the Lord, you'd think that there's a particularly evil element to what they're doing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so hence ayahuasca, it's brings you to this trip where you can communicate with these demonic beings, like serpent
Yeah.
beings, and
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, that totally makes sense. You
Yeah.
know,
I
It-
mean, I mean, and look how well it's worked. I mean, you got 81,000 opioid deaths in 2022, 81,000.
that's horrible.
And that's just the opioid, never mind the rest of them. That's like
Right?
fentanyl, especially.
Yeah.
But I mean, look how well they've worked. I mean, they held me in bondage for on and off for decades.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very much something from the enemy that has cost a lot of money, a lot of pain, a lot of lives, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, but on the biblical, on the positive side, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
man, I can look back on watching God and, looking over my history, because I've been homeless several times. I've rejected God. I mean, utterly. I mean, blasphemed God, like literally, like I've said the worst things you can think about saying about God and to God.
Mm.
Rejected him utterly, right? And yet I can watch him in my life working in various capacities. Because of his grace and his mercy, right? That he actually was there with me when I was homeless. He was there with me
Yeah.
when all these horrible things that I did, that I seen, that I experienced, but God was with me through all that. And still, even though I rejected him utterly and completely, that his grace and mercy was enough and sufficient for in 2019 when I was ready to like give my life to him again and to quit doing these things, that he was there for me.
Yeah.
And I had this thing where I thought, because, okay, so, in Hebrews, it talks about, basically people argue that shows that you can lose your salvation, whatever, if you get saved and then you and basically fall off the path or whatever, that
Hmm.
how can you get back on without crucifying, the Lord again? And that's kind of what my mentality was. I was like, well, like I tasted and seen that the Lord was good, and yet I still went back to the old lifestyle and rejected God. So like, I think there's only enough grace to cover me that one time,
Right.
but that was, it's obviously proved incorrect. Is that like just the infinite amount of grace and mercy that God has. And if he's had it for me, and obviously I'm only scratching the surface about what my life has looked like because of my own sin and my own decisions. But if he can save someone, like if he can save a wretch like me, and not only like salvation, like when I die, I get to go be with the Lord, like that's cool. But like he's actually made my life like so much better, way better than I deserve,
Yeah.
So that probably is way off track from what you were asking
No.
me. But I didn't want to just talk about the demonic side. I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about, grace and mercy too.
Yes. And if you're an addict and you're listening to this podcast right now, just want to read some verses that David shared or that he wrote in Psalm 139. He said, "Where
Mm,
can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. If I
mm,
say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for the darkness is as light to you." And so
amen.
if you're suffering an addiction and you feel like you're in a dark place, there's nowhere where you can go, no place that you can go in. No dark corner, no dark alley,
Yep.
no, even spiritually dark place with this addiction that you're facing that God cannot invade right now. He
Yep.
can invade that area of your life, and no matter how dark that is, that darkness is as light to God, and
Yep.
there is hope for you. There really is.
Yep.
And so just wanted to share that.
It's the
And with
second
that,
time I've heard that today.
wow, really?
At communion. So we have communion at my church at the end of every service. And what we started doing recently was praying a psalm
Yeah.
before communion. And
Wow.
so those exact verses were the communion this morning. That's awesome.
Well, and often when this is shared, it's talking about, well, you can't hide from God. You can't hide your sin from God. So you might as well repent. But there's also a very comforting aspect to these verses, because
Yeah.
if you can't hide from God and God is good and he loves you, that psalm is more than just oh, I better not try to run from him. That
Yeah.
psalm is also, I better take comfort knowing that God is there and he loves me and he wants to see me have victory. He wants to shine his light upon this
Yeah.
darkness and
Amen.
extinguish it.
Yeah.
So if you're suffering an addiction, please consider what David said in these
Mhm.
verses. God loves you and he wants to see you set free. He really does. He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. And
Yep.
so I just believe that if you're listening to this and you think there's no hope for you, trust me, you should read a little bit about King David and some of the messed up things he did, but God
Yeah.
still brought him through it. So with that said, let's talk about this topic of overdose. What should people know about overdose and it's prevention. I know this seems, for those of you listening, this seems kind of like a dark turn, but really it's like, this is a serious thing, and a lot of people in the church don't really know a lot about it.
Yeah.
So what do you got to say for this?
I would say that the main thing is that unfortunately, so it used to be the junkies, homeless people, the hardcore, heroin junkies that were overdosing and of course dying from overdoses and stuff like that. However, unfortunately with fentanyl now out, which talk about spiritual warfare, talk about something that has destroyed hundreds of thousands at least young lives of really bright, smart people who are the image of God. But because of fentanyl now, it's now affecting everyone. So obviously, like I've probably lost 30 or more clients that were clients and also friends. I've been working in the treatment field for the last 4 years, a little bit more. And at least 30, maybe more. And there's my cat.
Got
smoking.
a visitor.
Yeah, there she is. You got to make her appearance. But it's not just them, right? It's not just people who are intentionally using drugs like fentanyl, but there's young people who are THC cartridges. Like you're talking like if fentanyl would have been out when I was in high school, guarantee you I'd be dead. Guarantee. There's no way without divine intervention. Obviously, I would absolutely be dead because, they're doing like, they'll put it in, it's supposed to be THC cartridges only, like marijuana, basically in a vape. But it's fentanyl inside it and they take a hit of it. They're dead. They're gone. There's no coming back.
Wow.
I've also heard stories, not just stories, but like people I knew personally who knew these people who weren't drug addicts. They weren't, they weren't using or drinking all the time, nothing like that. But they were just like wanting to go buy a couple Xanax, what called Xanax bars, just something to relax. People like to take them for anxiety or, just to relax and hang out, kind of like drinking a couple beers, right? Yeah. And these two early 20-year-old couple, they went what they thought were buying Xanax. They took like one pill apiece and they found them in the car, both overdosed on fentanyl because it was just a fake pill, just stuff like that. So unfortunately now, it's not just the homeless people and the junkies and them, them over there, right, who are dying and overdosing. It's now very much high school kids, college kids, even grown adults, people who have a nice house and drive a nice car and have a really good career. They don't do drugs very often, but they want to go party or something on the weekend and they get a hold of something. Or another sad part is like police officers who are doing a search on somebody and fentanyl blows in their face and they're overdosing on the ground and they have to be Narcan because of that. So as far as overdose awareness, just know that like it's not just them over there. It could very well happen to someone or your own kid or somebody like that.
Right.
But I also encourage people to look into what's called Narcan. It's right here. Kind of can see it. My light's kind of blocking it, but it's a nasal spray essentially, and it's very effective on reversing overdoses. I carry this with me. I got a few of these nasal sprays. They have some auto injectors as well. I carry these with me. These are kind of old, but I think they'll still probably work. If you can find a local resource where they have Narcan, keep it on you. Keep it in your car, purse, backpack, whatever. Especially if you're involved in like homeless ministry or you have stuff like that, right? Like I work in a treatment field, so I always have it with me because I know, but if you can, there's resources out there where you can get it for free. They hand it out. They like to give it to people. So, but it's very effective on reversing overdose. And it's real simple. You squirt it inside the nose, they're good to go.
That's good.
Of course, sometimes it takes multiple doses and it only lasts for so long, so you got to keep doing it. But it saved a lot of lives. Narcan has saved a lot of lives. I've seen it save people's lives as well. Just get educated. You know what I mean? Like just Google what to do if someone's overdosing, how to know if somebody's overdosing or not. If they're just passed out or if they're overdosing, how do I know the difference? Just stuff like that. If you're involved in any kind of ministry, especially homeless ministry or stuff like street ministry, stuff like that, right, or working with addicts, just have some Narcan, learn about how to give CPR, how to, there's a thing where you put your knuckle on the sternum and push real hard, and it helps people wake up from an overdose as well. Just stuff like that. So that's what I would say.
That's really good to throw out there, because I think that as this country, and regardless of what country you're in, but we're Americans, so we're coming from that context. But this country is being flooded with fentanyl and
Yeah.
these different drugs, and I just be ready for the type of people that you minister to in whatever ministry you're in. You're going to be running into this. As a youth pastor over the years, I can't tell you how many kids who come in to youth group and they get connected with the youth group, their parents are addicts, and you can it gets to the point where you can spot a parent who's an addict from a mile away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's more and more obvious as the years go by that this is an issue that, unless there's an amazing revival that takes place, is not going to go away. And so that's really good information for those of us who may be dealing with that population, or just in general. That's just really helpful. It's probably to the point where they need to include Narcan even in first aid kits at this point.
Yeah, seriously.
So this brings me to segment 4, and I want to talk about the church and the role of the church and the role of the people of God in this battle, because it really is a battle. And so how can the church better support individuals who are struggling with addiction?
I would say probably the main thing is, now well-meaning people do this, but I would say 99% of the time, addiction, alcoholism, and its various forms simply just can't be prayed away. I'm sorry. A lot of well-intentioned people try to, and I say 99% because I've heard some testimonies of people who say that basically they laid hands on they got prayed over. Someone laid hands on them to pray that their addiction would go away, and it did.
Well, I think of Dr. Michael Brown's testimony as well.
Yeah.
Like he came into that service a full-on addict, and he left completely. Like he was on drugs when he went into the service, and he left completely addiction free. Same thing with Steve Hill. Some of those guys from the Brownsville revival. But anyway, as you were saying, it's not always that story.
No, 99% of the time. Those are the outliers. Those are the obviously God can do whatever he wants, but most of the time, my own personal experience and the experience of working with thousands of men and women so far is that most of the time it takes work, and it can't be. Now, that doesn't mean don't pray for them, don't lay hands on them, but they're going to need more help than just your well-intentioned prayers and stuff like that. Obviously, do that, but it's not a demon that can just be cast out 99% of the time either. Obviously, I'm not saying don't do deliverance on an addict. Do deliverance, right?
And believe in the power of God to heal an addict.
Absolutely.
That is biblical.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's also the other side of it where they're going to have to do some work themselves. I mean, even if they have this miraculous experience where they went in a full-blown heroin addict who couldn't go 6 hours without heroin and start going into withdrawals, but they go to this like a Michael Brown experience. They get delivered from addiction. They don't have any withdrawal symptoms. They leave completely clean and sober. They're not high anymore. No symptoms, nothing like that. Even then, they're still going to have to do a lot of work.
A lot of friends to say goodbye to. A lot of lifestyle changes.
And cleaning up the damage of the past, like a lot of amends that need to be made, a lot of restitution, a lot of things gonna have to change. And also a lot of bad habits that aren't just drug related, are going to have to go too. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a lot more than just praying it away, So, also it's important to, if you're trying to help people, another big one before that one, is don't enable, right? So I see a lot of well-intentioned, families and all friends, that kind of thing. They're trying to help. So they give them cash, or they let them stay in their house for a few weeks. And like, obviously, if that's what the Lord's asking you to do for them, do it. I'm not saying don't do these things. But most of the time, handing cash or even like a prepaid Visa card to a drug addict or alcoholic is probably not a good idea. You're actually hurting them more than you're helping them.
Yeah.
Now, feed them, absolutely feed them. You know what I mean? Like if their electric bill got cut off, that's what someone did for me and my wife when we first got clean this last time. Was they paid our electric bill and they bought flea medicine for our dogs and stuff like that's fine. But he never handed me cash and he didn't let me live with him and his family. It's just not a good
Yeah.
idea. So
Yeah.
don't enable.
They have to have some skin in the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If it comes too easy, and I've done this myself. People have helped me and my wife out a lot, and there was no skin in the game. So it was easy to not have any gratitude for those things and to not appreciate them as much. But this last time we had to work for every little thing we have today is because we worked our butts off and we got it. And with God's help, right?
God,
and so now we appreciate it a lot more than we did when things were just given to us. And also too, support often looks like just finding somebody that knows more about it than you. Like I can almost guarantee you, any church across America, there's at least one person in there who is in recovery of some kind. Obviously, if someone comes to you and says, "Man, I'm struggling with methamphetamine abuse," I'm not saying to not put them in contact with maybe the person who's been clean off of pornography for some years, and that's what like they like to do. But really, they need to find someone that's got a similar addiction, if that makes sense. It sounds like why does it matter? It's the same thing, but it really does matter. So if an alcoholic comes to you, it's best to find another alcoholic. Or treatment centers, also 12-step meetings. They're free resources. Like 12-step meetings are free. They don't have to pay anything to go to them. They don't owe anybody anything.
Well, I think
they're all
just to what you're saying, is it just that there's empathy that another alcoholic or has that maybe a porn addict wouldn't have,
I
vice
think
versa.
that's part of it. But a big part of it too is like something one of it's called a lot of people in early addicts and alcoholics, I'll speak for them. I can't speak for the other types of addiction, but in early recovery we call it chronic uniqueness.
Okay.
It's where I walk in and I say, okay, well, you only had a problem with porn. You can't help me with my drug addiction. Like porn, what's that? Like, so what? You look at porn too much. Like, I'm shooting an 8-ball of heroin a day. Like, what are you going to tell me? So,
Right.
And there is some of that's kind of true. You know what I mean? Like, to get on the same level, it's like we have to have similar experiences, and most of the time alcoholics, they think, most of the time, not all the time, but a lot of times the alcoholic will think he's at a higher social level than the drug addict, because a lot of alcoholics, like they still have a good career. They haven't been to jail a bunch of times. A lot of times, they still have everything materially speaking, but they can't stop drinking. And then like, oh, I'm not as bad as that guy. He lost his whole house and his whole family and went to prison for 10 years for possession. So how can he help me? I'm better than him. It sounds like he wouldn't think that way, but that's honestly how a lot of us think in early recovery. Right. So
well, it's like the old way of saying it: if I can do it, you can do it. It's kind of presumptuous for someone who is only addicted to porn to go to a heroin addict and say, well, if I can beat porn, you can beat. It's a little presumptuous versus if you get someone who had been addicted to heroin, if I can do it, you can do it. And it has more power behind it, so to speak.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And your answer really actually covered a little bit of both of the next two questions, because I had asked, what actions can be taken by individuals within these communities, church communities, to foster understanding and help. You had a little bit there, which is really that you can't enable them, but specifically in a short answer, how can we show better understanding for people who struggle with addiction? And how can we help them? Like, just in a short answer, how can we show understanding?
I mean, really, it's as simple as showing empathy,
Yeah.
showing empathy, showing that, you don't condemn them for having it, especially someone who may have struggled. Maybe they've struggled with this for a long time and they've already been to rehab. It's supposed to be fixed already. But they keep relapsing or slipping or whatever you want to call it. Just showing empathy, like, hey, you know what I mean? Like sin is sin is sin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just having empathy and love and but also not enabling.
Right. Yeah. And so that's pretty important. And do you have one example of a positive experience from the church during your recovery? Just to give,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. People are always
absolutely.
bashing on the church. It's about time we
Yeah.
praise the church for the good that the church does. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. And I kind of mentioned
We
it a
should do that
second
more
ago,
often.
but
Yeah, you
um,
did. You did actually.
so
Um,
me and basically in May of 2019, me and my wife had just got off drugs and alcohol again. And there was a guy, his name is Cliff. He's from a church that we used to attend. And I don't even, God must have told him, I don't know, but he like reached out to me out of nowhere and like was asking me how I was doing. And I kind of lied to him. I was like, I think he showed up at our house and like just hung out with us. And again, like he hung out several times. He'd come over like out of nowhere and make sure we didn't have any beer in the refrigerator.
yeah,
He bought flea medicine for our dogs. He bought
yeah,
us
yeah.
groceries. He would just like, hey, y'all need some food? And he would show up with groceries.
Hmm.
And just stuff like that. I mean, he never gave us money. He's like, I can't help you with your addiction problems. I can't help you with that. But I can do these things. You need to get
Yeah,
help. And I did. We were going to meetings and stuff like that. And he's like, if you ever need anything like that, let me know.
yeah,
And I actually messaged him just last night and told him thank you for that and told him
yeah,
about the 5-year stuff. And um, just that little bit of help went a long way because between him and my dad, there was nobody else that came by well, my mom did actually.
yeah,
But for the most part, it was just me and my wife and out of nowhere, a guy who had never had any issues with drugs or alcohol in his life, was trying to help us. And we hadn't talked to him in, I don't know, a couple of years, maybe at that point. No real like, friendship or relationship with the guy. He just wanted to show us the love of Christ. And I mean, that went a
yeah.
long way. That went a
It
long
really
way.
does. And so if you're part of the church and you're listening to this and you're like, man, I just wish I could do more to help. If you see someone and it's obvious they're struggling through something like this, just show the love of Jesus to them. Don't
Mm,
enable them, as Michael's saying. That is dangerous for an addict, is to do anything that may be enabling. So like you said, not giving cash, but giving like food, and
yeah.
some of the other things that this friend of yours gave you guys, and just being someone that will show love in such a way that it's not enabling, but helping, showing
Yeah.
compassion, showing that there's people out there who will love them. And that's so good. And I know I made that comment. People are always bashing the church. It happens a lot. And it doesn't have to happen. We can look for positive examples of how God uses his church in these powerful ways.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you hate the church right now and you're listening, hey, the church does do good things. And if you're concerned with the church being hypocritical and whatnot, man, I mean, you can find the perfect church and you can go to it, and then immediately that church will be imperfect because you joined the service.
Yeah.
So just
Right.
be aware of that, but also know that as God's body, as the body of Christ, we have to, have to do what we can to help these people. They need a hand up, not a handout, but a hand up,
Yep.
so that
Exactly.
they can get victory. And so this brings me to this closing segment, some practical advice and resources. What are some practical steps someone can take if they're struggling with addiction right now? Practical steps.
Reach out. reach out for help, period. I mean, it's that simple. There are plenty of resources, which I'll give you here in just a little bit, but
Yes.
reach out to people, mentors, to friends, whoever it takes. Just reach out. Ask God. Obviously, ask God. Like, please help me with this. Please remove this from me. If you are doing certain things, if you're drinking a lot, if you're taking things like Xanax, benzodiazepines, they're called, don't stop those cold turkey, because you can have a seizure and that can be very, very deadly. Those people have passed away in detox from that stuff. But other than that, like, try your best to quit using, quit drinking, but do it safely. But reach out for help is the main thing. Just reach out for help. And if you reach out to somebody and they judge you, or they minimize whatever it is that you're struggling with, find somebody else. Go find somebody until you can get some help. But yeah, absolutely. The first thing is to reach out, admit you have a problem, and reach out for help.
Amen to that. Yes, and these resources you said you had mentioned, resources, books, programs that you would recommend to the listeners. I know you talked about 12 steps, but what else you got?
So I'm gonna plug. It's called Dallas Detox Center. It's actually a place I work right now.
Oh, cool.
And so the phone number is 210-860-2443, and I'll send this over to you so you can put it on the. But that's the number to a guy named Richard. So even if you have health insurance, obviously it's a private facility, but you can get in for low cost or sometimes no cost. But if you don't have insurance, still call the number, because my friend Richard will he'll find some kind of treatment center for you to get into, even if you don't have insurance. So, but you're going to have to be willing to actually do it. But yeah, Dallas Detox Center is a great resource. If we can't help you, then we will find somebody that can. Absolutely.
That's awesome. Awesome. Any final advice, thoughts for those affected with addiction or their loved ones?
Addiction is very lonely. That's a very lonely thing. Even for family and friends of addicts and alcoholics, it can seem very lonely. Like it's embarrassing because you don't want to tell your friends that your son or husband or wife or etc. is struggling with addiction. But no matter which side of it you're on, whether you're a friend or you are the family member, friend, etc., or you're the one suffering from addiction, alcoholism, there are a lot of resources out there. A lot of them are free. Some of them cost a little bit of money, but not a whole lot if you have health insurance, especially. But there's also things like Celebrate Recovery within the church. So if you don't want to step outside
that's a really
the church,
good program.
Celebrate Recovery. My wife is in one. I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but she's doing a 12-step program in a church right now. So it's Christ-centered and all that kind of stuff. So, but just know there are solutions, and there are people within walking distance of you right now, I guarantee you, who have been to the same thing or something similar, and they can help you out or point you in the right direction.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Michael, thank you so much for number one. Thank you for being vulnerable. Like that's huge. Being willing to be vulnerable, saying this is my story. You have a powerful testimony, and not every testimony is or even should be the Michael Brown, I went to an altar and then I never struggled ever again.
Yeah, that could be, I might, if someone could hear that and think that's the only way, and then that doesn't happen, oh, God's given up on me. Yeah.
Right. And so there's this piece that your testimony can bring a lot of people who may be struggling with addiction, that, you may get some punches in the jaw and you may have to pick yourself up. You may get knocked down. But at the end of the day, going back to even those verses that I shared, regardless of where you're at in your fight, God is there.
Yep.
And he will see you through it. He will be with you to the end. And you just need to keep fighting, keep pushing, keep going and getting together with people who will spur you on to get victory over that addiction, whatever it is. Taking some of Michael's advice in this. And for those of you who are listening and you just want to be more of a help, please do that. Be a person who can show them love. Buy someone groceries. Help somebody else. Don't enable them. Don't give them handouts. Give them give them a hand up and just understand some of the things that really these people face. People who suffer from addiction, they're in an everyday battle,
Yeah.
and this is something that's going to require the church, us as the body of Christ, to come up with this compassion and fight for them in the ways that we're able to. Fight for them on your knees. Also do
Yeah.
something. Don't enable. Pray for healing. Pray for miracles. That's one. Yeah, do that. But at the same time, support them as they fight this battle. There's just so much that goes with it. People can be, and there may be people right now who are listening to this, and you're addicted to something and you're discouraged. Remember that for God, the dark place that you're in is as light, and
Yep.
so yeah, thank you for your openness. Those of you who are listening, if you want information, yes, there will be a link to the Dallas Detox Center in the description box for the Bold Apologia podcast. I know that Michael will be sharing a lot of that as well. And yeah, Michael, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. For those
Yeah.
of you who are listening, Michael and I will be doing more podcasts together, so be ready for that. And yeah, Michael, just appreciate your journey, appreciate your openness.
Man,
And
thanks for letting me come on, man, and also for
absolutely.
coming on mine. It's
Yeah,
anyway. Yeah,
yeah.
thanks.
No. And is there anything you want to say to, I mean, I know that I've got my listeners who will listen, but we're going to have a little bit of overlap for the people who typically listen to your podcast. Anything you want to say to them?
Oh man, go check out Bold Apologia on Spotify. My fancy little banner there. Great podcast, man. It's really a great podcast. I see big things coming for it for sure.
Thank you.
Not prophesying, nothing like that, but yeah, go check out Adam on Bold Apologia. And yeah, man, thanks for having me on again. I can't wait to do something else with you, bro.
Yep. And for anyone listening to the Bold Apologia podcast, be ready for another great episode coming up next month. Don't know what it'll be on yet, but I'm looking forward to it. With that said, God bless everyone who has listened, whether you typically listen to the Bold Apologia podcast or to Charismatic Cheetah. God bless you. May you help people find victory, and may you have victory in your life over addiction. And may God bless you richly. Goodbye.
Amen.